Hello and welcome to the Moody Meeple podcast, a podcast all about the wonderful world of tabletop gaming. My name is Steve, I'm here with David, Dragon and Tom, and today we're going to be talking about digital board games or online board games. I hope you enjoy. So today we're going to talk about online board games, digital board games, whatever you'd like to call it. I think we're going to talk about many different forms. So I guess first of all, let's talk about what bits of software we've used, what kind of things we've done to play games online, especially in the last year or so, obviously due to the pandemic, and just to get our opinions and thoughts on things. I think we'll start with Board Game Arena, shall we? Because I know for a fact we've all played on Board Game Arena, so it's something that we can talk a little bit about. And yeah, basically it's just I think it's got about 300 odd games, and we were looking up the statistics for it, and it's like they've got something like 6 million registered users now. Yeah, what do you guys think about Board Game Arena in general? What do you think it's its strengths and weaknesses, really?
I feel like one of the strongest things it has is accessibility, both in terms of like it's got a really affordable like premium membership level, but also they've done a lot of things to like make it easy to pick up new games. So like they've got all sorts of like videos and like links for how to play. But also the games themselves. I think sometimes playing hobbyist board gamers can sometimes find like maybe some of the upkeep and understanding like the maintenance of games is like a sort of extra overhead as well as like what you actually do yourself. And I guess one of the handy things that Board Game Arena games do is they just handle all the extra stuff for you, so that your turn is just focused on what you need to do and what your decisions are, I guess.
Yeah, I definitely second that. It's kind of simple, affordable, and to the point. It does everything you need from digital tabletop games, and it delivers it very quickly. So you can jump onto the website and play. We play occasionally during lunch breaks. We all work in different places in different locations. Yet we can come together and play together, which I think is one of its main strengths, that you can just get a party together in seconds.
I think one of the main strengths that they have is just the ease of use, because they've really used modern browser technology to be able to implement the games. For example, we actually played a game of Santorini, and they actually used the HTML5 Canvas system to actually have a fully 3D game model that you could actually pick up and move around it in all dimensions, so you can actually look at the board game from every single angle that you needed to actually plot out how you're going to handle your moves. And that is something which you really couldn't have done in the past. It's only with like modern browser implementations that you can actually handle these sort of things. There's lots of games where it's literally just click and place type things. Occasionally you might have a click and drag, but with all the modern implementation, you've got a lot wider access to all the various game systems.
I think the quality does vary depending on the game, right? Because I mean I haven't looked too much into it, but I assume they have some kind of system for allowing publishers or game designers to or other people, actually, third parties, to be able to create the board game systems on their website. And I guess they're varying quality. So I guess that depends on whether that how they onboard the games, etc. And also the games themselves. Sometimes it just doesn't warrant so much effort. Like I think it works with Santorini, but
yeah, I was going to say exactly the same thing. That Santorini is that kind of case which they've thrown everything at it, and it's this glorious experience. But there are some games that it looks like they've been thrown together in maybe a few minutes. They really look like no time has been spent on them. I guess that's the same with a lot of these systems where you have a lot of different board games put together. They all have a very different feel. It doesn't feel like you're experiencing the same but different content, if you know what I mean. It just feels like it's a completely different website.
Yeah, I was going to actually say, weirdly, I think that the ease of use sometimes of Board Game Arena can, in some ways, and this is partly down to how maybe I play, to be fair, but it can sometimes be a have a negative effect on gameplay, especially when you're playing new games, right? Because it's so easy just to start a new game and just play it and have absolutely no idea what's happening in that game. And part of that is obviously the individual for not necessarily making sure they read up on the rules, but and some people would say, oh well, in real life you have to make sure you read the rules before you play. But my argument to that would be, in real life you have to set up, right? You have to actively get the thing out to be able to set everything up and know what you're even doing. Whereas Board Game Arena, it's set up for you and just goes, pick a card, and then it's so easy to play and not have a clue what's going on, which is sometimes a hindrance. But
you've got the play timer, and that puts that little bit of extra pressure on you if you don't know the game. So you jump in, like you say, it's pick a card, and I don't know what card I'm supposed to be picking. What's a card? And you're kind of going through that dilemma while there's this little countdown timer going, well, you've got 2 minutes, 59 seconds remaining. 55, 54. And you just end up getting a little bit stressed about it.
Well, I mean, obviously there is I think there is a training mode that doesn't have the timer, but I think even then, like, you still have to. You're not really. It doesn't really feel like you're learning as you're playing. Sometimes it's sort of almost your hand gets held a little bit too much.
Well, I think would be really cool. So I don't think that maybe necessarily slowing down those sections or would solve it, but I think maybe having so on the right hand side it has sort of a history of all the moves that different players do. I think what would be really cool is to see like a history of the things that happen, during upkeep and things like that, and maybe even just generally some extra detail there, because even a couple of times on games that I kind of know like a fair amount about, I've kind of been like, oh, what happened there? I didn't quite catch that, and just having that bit of extra detail, I think would go a long way there, because I think particularly like the upkeep stuff that, like, say if stuff happens between rounds, it can be quite easy to. I guess it is kind of a double-edged thing, because on the one hand, it's kind of nice that you can ignore that stuff, that you have the option of ignoring that stuff. But if you want to understand it better, I think it would be nice to have just that little bit more transparency there, I guess.
That's the thing that Board Game Arena actually takes away from gaming. It hides the main mechanics. So it automates everybody's turns. It does automatic like end of phase administration and the tidy ups. It automatically handles all of the scoring. So it does actually abstract away a lot of the actual mechanics, which makes a game a fully immersive game. So it's not exactly the same experience. In some essence, it's a lot easier because all the hand management and everything else is done for you. But on other things, you're not having the full experience of the game because you're not doing the administration phases of the game.
Which is why I would say that from our experience anyway, Board Game Arena tends to favor those types of games that you can very quickly just keep playing. For me, the ones I've been playing a lot of are like Seven Wonders and Splendor. The ones that once you've played once, you can play it a million times and just try and find the best way of playing it. And I think that favors that type of game far more than games that have a lot of different mechanics going on. And it's
I think I do have a counter example to that. So one of the games that I've ended up playing a bit recently with with my dad because it's one of his favorite games. Is Through the Ages, which is quite like a complex game, and definitely like the abstraction there has maybe like caused me to miss some things. But I feel like it's one of these cases where probably the cost is worth it, just because like if you were to set up like the physical game, there's actually quite a lot of like upkeep, so like moving along like the tableau each turn. There's quite a lot of like just loads of like little cubes and things that you have to set up. And so I think it's probably one where overall, even though I had to work a bit harder to understand what really happened in places, I think it kind of benefited just because like it's a game where there is a lot of that upkeep and setup, which you can just like completely bypass.
But then, my sort of counter argument, and I think this is already true for me, is that what Board Game Arena does do sometimes is when you go play the real physical game, you sort of fall into either you just forget or you sort of fall into bad habits. So one example for me was playing Splendor. You have this great feature in Board Game Arena where it tells you how many more gems you need to buy the cards on the table. And so when you go and sit down and play a real game of Splendor, you're sat going, oh no, I've got to do the actual maths now.
Oh no.
And stuff like that. Yeah, I know. And I guess with that game, Through the Ages, yes, I completely agree that the setup and everything is handled for you. But then when you go down and sit and play the actual thing, maybe you've forgotten. Well, how do I set this up again? I don't know. It'd be interesting to see maybe when things go a little bit more back to normal, whether that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of wonder in some ways if some games, I don't know if I'd fully commit to saying this for Through the Ages actually, but it does kind of make me wonder if like some games are just like better off on digital platforms and some are just sort of better off on physical ones. Yeah, I don't know. That's more of amusing than anything else, I guess.
So the one thing that's really arisen is the popularity of these online gaming systems, especially over the past year. I mean, March, April last year, Board Game Arena almost collapsed because everybody and their dog was jumping on to using it and they just couldn't cope. So they had to bring a whole load of more servers online to actually cope with the sudden influx. So I don't think many people actually did a lot of online gaming before the pandemic started. There was a few, but the popularity has certainly massively exploded over this past year.
I wonder if that actually extended before. Obviously, yeah, definitely COVID has had a huge impact on that. But I was reading up on Board Game Arena, and actually after 2018, they moved, the guys that created it moved full time on it. So I think the popularity was growing. I don't know whether that's due to maybe their technology being better or just, you know, I think there's always a place personally for playing games online, because I know certainly growing up, I didn't always have, making it sound like a sob story, but you didn't always have the group of players, a regular group of players that you want to be able to just sit down and play board games all the time. So having platforms like this to be able to play your favorite game as many times as you like with, and make friends from people all around the world, I think there's always going to be a market for that personally.
That's certainly something I can attest to. I mean, I started my gaming sort of things using play-by-mail game systems where you'd have to put your turns in a post and it'll be sent off to a company. They'd process all the turns and mail out all of the results. And from there, I progressed onto using play-by-email game systems. And in fact, my first experience with PBEMs is Rich's PBM server, which I started playing back in 1994, and I'm still playing now. So we're talking 25, 26, 27 years, and I'm still going strong with this. And I've literally played thousands of games of backgammon. I don't know how many games I've got, but I've got a pretty good ranking. I think I'm ranked about 13th or 14th in the world ranking for that. But well, the world ranking of people who actually play PBEM games. So yeah, there's certainly a lot of interest in keeping online communities together through digital gaming mechanisms, and obviously the modern gaming systems like Board Game Arena, Tabletopia, Tabletop Simulator, all these sort of things is just going strong from strength to strength.
I did want to touch on Tabletopia. I know personally I've never used it, but I had a quick look, and it does look like a similar system to Board Game Arena. Sorry, but it's got I think it looks like it's got a lot more games, like well over almost 2,000, I think, games. But then you have the disadvantage of I think it's a higher brand price bracket for premium members, so to give you access to pretty much all the games.
Yeah,
just wondered
so
if
I've
anyone's played on that.
I've played on
Tabletopia
it a bit, and yeah, so my experience was that I'd say that it's like Board Game Arena in how it presents itself as a platform, and the way that you can kind of find, like, I guess there's a bit of a matchmaking system where you can sort of find and play with people. But the biggest difference is that you're actually using like a 3D virtual space, kind of like on Tabletop Simulator, which, and actually, I think from when I played on it, you do kind of have to do your own upkeep. So it's kind of closer to mirroring like the real world experience, I guess. And I think for me, it sort of does one thing. So it and Tabletop Simulator do something which Board Game Arena doesn't, which is I've actually found that when playing games with other people digitally, I actually find that sort of virtual space really valuable, just for getting a sense of kind of sharing that space with other people. So on Board Game Arena, it's sort of you're kind of, for most of the games, like, you're kind of presented with, I guess, flat sort of boards or grids and things like this, and so and you can't really see how other people interact with the game. You can see the results of it, but you can't sort of see them interacting in real time, like moving things around, and things like that, which is like it's actually like it wasn't obvious to me, I guess, um, before I experienced it, but it is something that on the tabletop simulator side that I've come to find quite valuable.
So, I mean, how would you say that the each different sort of platform? So, Board Game Arena that does a lot of the upkeep for you versus something like Tabletop Simulator. Are they better or worse for certain games? Would you say, or is it all about the group that you're playing with, perhaps instead?
I think the group that you're playing with has like quite a big impact on it, because I think that tabletop simulator it's more powerful in what it lets you do. So you can find different mods that have, like, say, scripts that'll do things for you. You can, like, even the fact that you're downloading mods, really, I think would be off-putting to, well, say like if I was to introduce it to like my broader family, for example. And also, yeah, so I think on that side of things, it's more complicated maybe, but it's more powerful in what it lets you do. I think Board Game Arena is really good for particularly people who maybe because of time, or yeah, for certain games as well, I think, where you just don't want to kind of have the overhead. You just kind of want to dive straight into a game and not think about it. I think it's really good for that. And Tabletopia is sort of in the middle, where you get some of the overhead of like upkeep and stuff, and you get that nice virtual space I was talking about. But it's kind of, I'd say it's a bit more of a consistent experience maybe than Tabletop Simulator, and you can do it from the browser. So it's sort of like almost a compromise between the two, I'd say.
Yeah, you don't necessarily need as powerful a device for those as Tabletop Simulator. And looking at the cost, if you add up all of the paid for DLC, because there are officially licensed downloadable content items for Tabletop Simulator, like Zombicide and Scythe and Wingspan, things like that. If you add all of that content up, you're talking about £250 worth of content. So it adds up pretty quickly. If you wanted to play all of those games, and we're not talking many here, we're talking 46 games, which, let's face it, a lot of us here on this chat have more games than that in our collections. So we end up buying those games twice and paying almost as much for the virtual game as we play for the physical game, and it adds up pretty quickly. Whereas with things like Board Game Arena, it's a small token payment, and you can play to your heart's content on a limited gaming set, but it's still enough to keep us interested.
Yeah, that money advantage actually goes even further, because I think on both Tabletopia and Board Game Arena, you can actually have only one group member needs to be like a premium member to allow other people to join in on like the more premium games.
I think there is on Board Game Arena, it's one price for all premium games and guests. I think with Tabletopia, there's 2 premium levels, and I think silver or whatever, you can't have guests without premium, but gold, which is I think £10 a month, you can have guests without premium. So they're sort of, you can do that, but they're sort of behind multiple levels of subscription. Which I think is a slight advantage to Board Game Arena, because it's one very cheap price and it just gives you access to all the premium games, and you don't get as many games perhaps, but I mean the ones they have on there are pretty good. I wanted to obviously, apologies to Dragon because I know you've never played Tabletop Simulator, but I wanted to come back to it because one of the main disadvantages for me on Tabletop Simulator is I think the learning curve with just like generic controls. There's sort of little shortcuts on the keyboard to like flip cards and shuffle cards, and you have to sort of know. There's not really much of a tutorial necessarily, so unless you've got a really sophisticated script, I find it can be quite challenging to know all the bits and pieces to control everything, all the shortcuts, etc. to control. So I was wondering if whether you think that might be a disadvantage to Tabletop Simulator, and I don't know, maybe I'm missing something. I'm not sure, but
I think it's both a disadvantage and an advantage, right? It's difficult to learn, but it's got a lot of power behind the scenes. It's effectively a sandbox game where you can have any content in there that's essentially got physical components in it.
Yeah, that's totally my perspective, and for me, it kind of fits in with that spectrum of like on Board Game Arena, you've got a really simple user interface. It's very accessible, but you can't really break out of I guess the set way of doing things they've got. So even simple things that you might do in real life, like, oh, I made a mistake there, will you let me take it back? You can't do in Board Game Arena. Whereas on Tabletop Simulator, it definitely is much harder to learn. Like even to do like some like relatively simple things with the camera controls, like you have to kind of learn to get that smooth experience, but it does like give you a lot more freedom when you get there.
One more advantage that I certainly haven't actually got working is you can actually have Tabletop Simulator in VR and in virtual reality. So yeah, you told me you were talking about occupying the same space as people. I would imagine that VR also offers you even more of that immersion. And as I said, I haven't actually managed to ever get the VR working, if I'm honest, so that's maybe quite a disadvantage, but I haven't tried in a while, to be fair. But I think also that might help with some of the intricacies of like shortcuts, etc. with Tabletop Simulator, because you can actually, with the VR controls, hopefully actually just sort of move things around like you would a real table. So there's like an immersive element, and then also a sort of more like real life element of moving components, and that's possibly an advantage, a very expensive advantage, but an advantage that Tabletop Simulator has.
Yeah, I agree. I've played it in VR, and from what I remember, and I could be misremembering, but you pick up the deck and you shake it to shuffle it. Things like that just kind of helps. It still has some clunky things. Like, I think effectively the controller support's very similar to the mouse support. You have to do a long hold to pick up, but it's it might have progressed quite a lot because I'm talking about a couple of years ago that I last tried it in VR, so it's quite some time ago now.
Yeah, I guess particularly if I don't know if they have, but if they get to the point where you can do gestures with your hands, then that would be really cool. Because I guess like with the I want to say traditional like VR controls, it's like you've still kind of got that barrier that's similar to, as you say, like a mouse between you and the pretend tangible pieces.
And I know I did mention the price of the DLC for the game, but what I didn't mention is the huge workshop that it has. The Steam Workshop, and Steam Workshops are effectively a place where people create content for games. People being, Joe Public. You can get a lot of free workshop content for this game. We're talking a couple of thousand games, from what I can tell. It's just huge.
It's worth noting, though, that not all of that content may necessarily be licensed.
Yes, that's a grey area because some games they openly endorse it if it's unlicensed, and others really more than just frown upon it. It is practically illegal.
Actually, one company that, and it sort of leads on to another type of online digital game. One company that has a real presence in all of this is Stonemaier, so the makers of Wingspan, Scythe, Tapestry, and I think most recently Red Rising. The reason I mention them is because I've seen them on fully licensed on Board Game Arena, on Tabletopia, on Tabletop Simulator, and they have their own versions of the game that you can buy as standalone digital copies. So that kind of leads in. I mean, one that I think that's I think it's very interesting that they're literally everywhere. That clearly they are monopolizing on it a lot, which is pretty cool. And I wonder why other games maybe don't do that as much, possibly resource or whatever. And then also, secondly, the like I said, the other type of digital game I wanted to mention was just the straight up digital version of a game that companies like Asmodee Digital make a lot of, and I think Fantasy Flight make a few as well. And you can get that often on things like Steam on your desktop, but you can also get mobile versions as well. So I wanted to talk about those and how they compare to the other sort of platforms we've talked about.
And frankly, when we used to play them, because before lockdown, I played probably more on my mobile on the way to work than I did any other type of digital tabletop game.
Yeah, that is very true. I remember quite a few train journeys and bus journeys, and the nice thing about them, it's important to mention actually that Board Game Arena has a mobile app as well. So I mean, you can play it on the move now. But I mean, some of the nice things that you get with sort of fully licensed mobile games that I'm not sure if you get with. I think you can get it with Tabletopia, but I don't know if you can get it on mobile with Tabletopia. And that's things like pass and play. So if you're like physically on the bus or on the train or something, and you just say, do you want to play a quick game of Carcassonne on the phone, and you just take your turn and pass it on, and that sort of stuff. So that's definitely one advantage.
One of the best things I've found for dedicated apps, well, or two of them, I guess, is one, they seem to be a lot better at tutorials. Like I've seen some really great tutorials for like how to play games on dedicated ones. Whereas even on Board Game Arena, like it's just not quite the same if you're like, say, watching a video, or I think it can like sometimes it has a thing to like take you through a few turns. But yeah, some of the dedicated apps have really like great, fairly immersive tutorials. And then the other thing that I think is really cool is often like you can go against like AI opponents, which I mean, I guess like if you do it a lot, it'll kind of get tiresome. But sometimes, like if you don't have any signal, or you want to like practice for a real game, or going against like a human opponent, it can be fun to kind of have that option, I guess.
Yeah, I would definitely say the AI element and the offline element, in fact, is probably what makes those games a bit better than something like Board Game Arena. Obviously, there is the negative that you purely have one game for that one app. Although sometimes they will be free to play. Sometimes, not all the time.
Yeah, I'd say the other negative is that the games tend to be ports of the mobile app. So you have it on your mobile device, you have it on your PC. The PC version is almost always the same version. But there are obviously exceptions to that, but I think it's too frequent you see what is essentially just a mobile port, and it doesn't necessarily work as well on the PC as it did the mobile device.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth saying they're definitely hit and miss, right? Depending on how much resources they've had. I know, is it Veticulture? I think that was released not all that long ago, and I haven't played it, but it was released to quite poor reviews initially, so you have to be careful when releasing those types of games to make sure that they're well usable.
But it's the flip side as well, is that I think actually dedicated games get a lot of great production values a lot of the time, with like extra art and kind of sound design and that sort of thing. A really great one that I tried recently was the dedicated Root app, actually, where they've done sort of, I think it's 3D animations of like some of the units, and you can like sort of see them fighting each other when there's battles, and it kind of adds to that immersion. And it's something which I guess the online platforms can't really do, because I guess they could, but to make it scalable would be very expensive, because they tend to kind of make things in a generic way that you can kind of bring in more games more easily, so you don't get that sort of bespoke feel necessarily.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. If you look at things like Blood Bowl, which were third-party licensed titles for, effectively Warhammer Universe, they look amazing, and they're still effectively board games. Versus the kind of influx of the more generic mobile experience, or the web-based apps that we're seeing being the predominant way of playing online.
I think something that I've found really interesting recently is, which is kind of a similar area but not exactly the same, is digital board games that only exist in the digital space, or even video games that borrow very heavily from board games. So some of the things I'm thinking of here. So on one end, you've got games like Armello, which is literally designed to be a board game. So you like roll dice and essentially move pieces across a board. But there's no physical equivalent, and I don't think there was ever a plan for there to be. Or Slay the Spire was quite a popular sort of deck building roguelike, I think. Or even things like Civilization is kind of a giant, more sophisticated board game.
Wasn't it based on a board game? Effectively,
I think so, yeah.
And then now it has board games that are based on it. So it's gone full circle.
How the table turns.
So I'd be interested to get. I think we've probably touched on this a little bit, but I'd be interested to get everyone's opinion on how we think these platforms compare to playing board games traditionally, real life, and what are the things that we most miss, and what are the things that maybe we don't miss from playing in real life.
I don't miss greasy burger hands on my models.
Or do you remember when someone chucked your card into a glass of Coke or something? Fortunately, I think they were sleeved. Was that you or was that Tom? I can't remember. Someone I remember, I think it might have been Cthulhu Wars or something like that. Someone just sort of accidentally flicked the card and it just landed in someone's drink. So that's something that we definitely don't have playing digitally.
But on the flip side of that would be the thing that I miss most. When we talk about, being that in that physical space with that presence that Tom was talking about with things like Tabletop Simulator, it's still not the same as having people there physically, having that banter around the table, people looking at, admiring the models or the artwork for the game. All those things, they're just kind of lost on the digital version. You still have it a little bit, especially with things like Tabletop Simulator, when you just unwrap new DLC and you have a look at it, and you have a little bit of that going on, but it's still not quite the same. You don't have your new toys to play with.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think that some games maybe feel that loss more than others. So, for example, when I've tried to play games like Seven Wonders, for example, on Board Game Arena, it's kind of like even if it's with friends and family who like I'll talk to on a call maybe, it's just not quite the same because it just ends up that like the turns just move on like really quickly, and it's kind of harder to I don't know. I guess partially because of that like quick upkeep that it's doing for you. Like it's just easy to kind of get into a rhythm where you're sort of just engaging with the mechanics and engaging less with like the players next to you or virtually next to you, I guess.
I guess it becomes much more a multiplayer solitaire type experience.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's pretty much down to the group of players you're playing with, because with any of these game systems, you can just join a random game and you're literally just playing the mechanics of the game itself. Whereas to really enjoy it, you need to have a side channel where you can have the chat and the discussions and how dare you move there and or take my piece type sort of things. It's something which we have in the real world, obviously, because we're always having these jokes about how the game is progressing. But when you're actually having the online version, you've got to have the secondary channel for the discussions, which is usually outside of the game system. So whether you've got the chat on Discord or another chat service, you've got to have that interaction to make the game better. Otherwise, it's just really dull.
Yeah, and I've found that I've ended up seeking out games that kind of provoke that sort of side discussion more if I'm playing with people that I'm on a call with, because I think it depends on the group, but it also does depend on the game a bit. Where I think some games, like if you think of like, yeah, I guess like some games are just better at like pushing people to make those exclamations like, "Oh, how could you do that? That's completely messed me up," and things like this.
I kind of disagree in a sense. For me personally, the games that I find the most that are probably most enjoyable in person are sort of big epic games or quite large games. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy playing small games as well, like short quick games as well sometimes. But you get the real satisfaction out of getting Scythe or War of the Ring or something out and playing it in person. Those types of big epic games can be quite tedious online, and I agree you definitely lose that sort of interaction. When it comes to quick and short games, in a way, I kind of like, in almost a complete contrast to Tom, I kind of like playing something like Seven Wonders and just playing it and playing it and playing it and playing it, which sounds like you'd play it to death, but I mean that's part of the wonderful thing about Seven Wonders is that you get a different wonder every turn, you get a different side every turn. You get a completely different hand. You know, the deck is completely different every single time. And in a sense, maybe it's a bit of a sort of competitive element of myself, but I quite like having the flexibility to just play something over and over again, and be able to sort of because I can improve a lot more at the game, and there's a satisfaction there from my point of view of being able to improve at the sort of strategy of certain games, I suppose.
Yeah, I used to do the same thing with Small World. The similar thing that you just, because all of the admin for the game is taken from you, you're just concentrating on playing the game. You're playing different factions each time. You have different foes, you have different numbers of foes, but it's just quick action. So you can get in there, play the game, learn the different tactics to face off different races, and you kind of learn how to play. Although with the AI in Small Worlds, I think it's Small World 2 on the mobile app for some reason. But when you're playing that against the AI is predictably weak against the vampires. So you just end up going, yeah, as soon as I can, I'm grabbing the vampire race straight away.
I would say that my view on this is quite different for playing against strangers. So I'm quite happy to play a game of Seven Wonders, a few times against strangers online. I guess it's one of these things where I feel like there isn't a huge difference between playing Seven Wonders online against strangers as opposed to some degree playing it against, like, say, my family. And so it's more that when I'm actually playing a game with other people I know, I kind of want to have things that kind of, stir up a bit more discussion and things that make you want to talk about what's happening rather than, because I guess that like iteration of improving over many games, like that sounds like something that you kind of want to be quick and snappy. Whereas when I'm playing games with friends and family, I kind of like the discussion that kind of happens around the game as well.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense as well. I think one other thing I would say about playing with strangers is again, it comes back to sort of improving at a particular game as well. Is you have the ability to play against different people than you would usually play with, which does give you the I guess a kind of advantage, because you can try different strategies, you can see what other people do, and because I'm sure like sometimes there's an element of if you play with the same people all the time, there's an element of like, oh well, I know this person's thinking about doing this, so I'll do, like Seven Wonders. Let's say I know this person's going to go science, so I'll nab that science card, for instance. So there's an
You're
element
talking about me, aren't you?
no, I wasn't. But,
That sounds like Tom to me, but
It happens, but you get to understand the mechanics. I mean, with online game, it's very easy to do a quick lunchtime session just to get things up and running quite easily, and you can just cope with those sort of things. Just a quick 30-minute game here or there, and you can actually churn through them quite quickly. So it's very useful in that sense for with people you can go through the games. But when you're going against strangers, you can try the same strategy over and over again to see how it works against different people. But you can also vary your strategy as well. So you've got both sides of the coin with that.
I think also one of the advantages of playing online, and it's also an advantage of board game cafes as well, to be fair, and that is being able to try before you buy. I know it's definitely happened to me on a couple of occasions more recently where I've jumped into Board Game Arena, we've played a game, and I've gone, ooh, I like this. I'll just, nab it on Amazon or whatever. So, I mean, that's definitely one advantage of Board Game Arena versus, I guess, real life. Like, you can't walk into a shop and go, I'd like to try this board game, please. But yeah, I suppose like I said, there's an advantage of board game cafes though. So, but then you've got to pay for entry and pay for probably food and drink, and then it all becomes a bit more of an experience where board game arena you can just, like we've been saying, you can just sit down and play a game in half an hour and work out if you like it.
I think the harder part there is actually deciding what game to play. You've got all of these games in front of you, and you've got to try and pick one. Where the board game cafe, you kind of all gravitate towards certain titles, and you think, yeah, I like the sound of that. You can ask the staff. It makes the selection a little easier. Whereas when it's online, I at least personally find it harder to find a game that I want to play.
So that's why you use How Many Meeple?
Shameless plug. Well, I mean, Board Game Arena certainly does give you does offer some filtering for, I've got this many players. I want to play for, I want a medium length game or whatever, and you can choose whether you want to favour complexity over something else. I would say, in a sense, though, there's kind of less risk on Board Game Arena if you or similar games if you don't like the game, right? Like if you sit down and you start up a game on Board Game Arena and you play it and it takes half an hour to an hour and you just go, that was a effing rubbish game. Like, you haven't lost that much time. Whereas if you go into like a board game cafe or you buy a board game, and you set it up and you learn the rules and you sit down and you play it. Sometimes learning the rules can sometimes hinder us. We've had that experience with things like Star Wars Rebellion, where maybe our interpretation of the rules hasn't worked out quite as we planned, and it's not made the experience as good as it could have been. I think that's one less risk that you have with online games, which is an interesting one.
You've also got the mechanic of the online games, as you've got the metagaming side of things. For things like Board Game Arena, you score experience points for playing certain games or winning certain matches, and some people can take that to extreme, as you're only playing the games to get the extra points to play the games. So it's kind of an extra mechanic on top of the normal games, which I don't really like that so much, because to my mind, it takes away the enjoyment of just playing the game for the game's sake. So you're playing it just to score extra points to be higher up a ranking within the gaming community of BGA.
It's
maybe
it's not quite that bad, I don't think, because you can play training mode with anyone, strangers or friends, which doesn't have any of that. But then you can also, if you play online, you do just sort of naturally get a rank if you win. But then once you get to, I think, 100 or whatever on a certain game, you have the option of going into what is effectively competitive, right, or ranked games, which you don't actually have to do. So, although I sort of agree with you, like, it's not necessarily. I think most online games on BGA are probably just people wanting to play, unless you play sort of the actual ranked part of it.
It's kind of a funny idea though, because I guess like it turns your individual game into one of a sequence where, I don't know, it becomes almost a game of games.
I mean, I personally kind of like it, but I mean, I think we've established that apparently I'm quite a competitive person, it seems. And having that ranking, I suppose it offers a little bit of an incentive, I suppose, to play the same to play the same game again, which you might not necessarily have in real life. I don't know if that's an advantage or a disadvantage, if I'm honest, but I think it's an interesting thing to explore.
I feel like it's definitely an advantage that it exists because it's optional. If it was something which like everyone using Board Game Arena was automatically always on like ranked mode, essentially, I think that would be a pretty sad experience for a lot of people. But yeah, I think the fact it exists is nice.
It's probably quite a difficult thing for us to talk about because, I mean, competitive board gaming has probably been a thing for a very, very long time, but we're not the type of person, type of people to go and play competitive board games, and I think that we have to remember that these platforms and everything really has multiple different types of people that want to play it differently, and that I think it's pretty nice that Board Game Arena can offer the casual gamer something, but it can also offer something to the competitive gamer as well, like tournaments and ranked, etc. So it's a feature that's probably good to have, better for other people than perhaps us as more casual gamers, regular gamers, but more casual.
Yeah, I think the achievement system is probably aimed more at us.
Yeah, for sure. Like, you got your first win, yay! Yay! That actually does feel pretty good to me, because you don't, unless you log it in something like Board Game Geek, you don't have that history, right? Like, I've got no idea how many times I've, I don't have a full history of what I've scored in Seven Wonders when we've played at work or whatever. And I'm sure some people will be like, well, that's just a load of boring rubbish, but to me it's kind of interesting, like, have I if I've won, why have I won there? Is it because I went more civic, or sorry, I keep going back to Seven Wonders, such an easy example, isn't it, really?
The thing that captures that for us in a lot of games is like the score sheets. So often if we finish a game and it happens to be a game that has score sheets, we'll just like put a little date in the corner and like circle who won. And that way you kind of do have that tangible history, which is kind of fun to look back on. I mean, it's definitely not as exhaustive as, like, I don't know, if you did record everything on Board Game Geek, or if you played exclusively on Board Game Arena, it would kind of keep it for you, I guess. But it's kind of fun to have that to look back on. I agree.
Yeah, I'm definitely a bit of a stats nerd, and I have been collecting those things on Board Game Geek using the companion app. But it's something that you have to consciously do, so you occasionally forget. Whereas this is all built into the system. This is kind of the added value that an online board game system provides you, right?
Right. Well, and I think in conclusion, for me, I think I've actually been talking a lot on the side of pros for digital games, but I think I do agree that nothing really beats sitting around a table with people, right? I mean, even just the physical. I mean, I think David touched on it, but unboxing a game for me is probably one of the best experiences I have. But maybe that's quite sad. I don't know, but having a board game arrive and just unwrapping it and maybe organizing it or just having a look at the components and the cards and stuff. There's a
Yeah.
element of being a kind of a child with a new. I think you've already pretty much summed that up, haven't you? Really, but there's an element of a child with a new toy or something.
Absolutely agree with you there. Taking the cards out, punching out the tokens, sleeving the cards, looking at the artwork. It's all those things that it brings you back to that special place. You feel happy inside when you're doing those things. At least I do.
Yeah, definitely.
The other major aspect that about physical board games that make me happy anyway, I don't know about you guys, is introducing a game that, like, maybe a group of friends or some family have never played, introducing it to them and them just absolutely loving it is a really rewarding feeling for me. So, an example might be I introduced Dixit to my family, and they're not the biggest sort of gamers, but I introduced Dixit to my family, and even my mum played, who never plays board games with us. And I think the following year, my sister was like, "Can I have that for Christmas?" and similarly, I a few episodes back, I talked about my favourite game, Discworld. I introduced that to my friends that I played D&D with, and every time we talk about a board game night, it's like, "Is that coming? Can that come, please? I really want to play that again." And that's something that you definitely you don't have that same experience with it's a bit more of a learning curve for friends and family who maybe aren't regular board games, board game people, than just having the physical thing, and obviously spending time with them as well.
That's another part of the hobby to me, that teaching friends and family how to play games. That's all part and parcel of the experience. And you gave a couple of good examples there, Steve. I have very similar experiences with Century Golem Edition. That initially my family were a bit skeptical. They're not really board gamers. They, it's a tabletop game, but same difference. And they loved the artwork, and that lured them into trying to play the game. And they got together with my aunts, my uncles, my parents, my kids, and we all just sat down and all had a turn on this game. And it's that bonding experience that tabletop gaming provides that I don't think many other hobbies can really capture.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that's quite a nice sentiment to end on, unless anyone else has anything, to add. But I mean, definitely sounds like for us, can't wait to get back into the cafes and back around the table again. But I also think I certainly have been very grateful to have these sort of digital versions of games and digital platforms, so that we can sort of get an essence of the hobby without needing to leave our homes. So big ups to the guys who make those sort of games. Right. Well,
I really agree.
Right. Well, thanks everybody for listening, and thanks for the guys for coming and having a chat. Make sure you tweet at us. I think it's at Moody Meeple, and tell us what you most like about online games or what you dislike about online games, and we'll be sure to mention you in the next episode. Right. Thank you, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the podcast, and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.